everyone. Thank you for joining Synerzip's webinar. This is Jill Hurston. I'm the Marketing Director here at Synerzip. We're going to start our webinar on building a great UX with a remote team. I just want to remind everybody that I am recording this session and it will be available by tomorrow on our website. You will all receive an email from me with the direct link to the webinar recording and to the PowerPoint presentation. Also, during the presentation, if any of you have any questions, please just type into your chat box and we'll get to you as soon as we can. So to start off, I'd like to introduce Vinayak Joglekar. He is our co-founder and CTO at Synerzip. He will be moderating today's webinar. Vinayak, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Jill. And I would give a little bit of introduction. Then we will have first half of the webinar we'll be covering the user experience using a remote team as a background about the practice that we have built here in Synerzip. And in the second half, we will be going over a case study where we would be joined by our esteemed customer PDX and by Brandy, who will be representing the customer, and by Vishal, who is working with our customer as a user experience designer. So that's going to be the broad outline of today's webinar. It's said that user experience is more important than the brand, and there is a popular Gartner report which says so. And it's 2018, and I can believe that because there are many cases where a product which is bought, which is paid for, and still it is not used the way we designed it. There are a lot of features and functionalities which are never used by the users because they don't really deliver value, or they are not a pleasurable experience. So user experience is very important. There are two major changes that have happened in the past couple of years. The one big change that is happening is user experience is no more a big activity upfront, but it is spreading out into agile iterations, and it is becoming more democratized to that extent. So instead of user experience design happening in ivory towers, it's now happening in along with the developers in the same room as the developers are. So that is one thing that has changed. And the second thing that has changed, that most of the user experience design teams are not co-located with the development teams. So that's a big change. So today we are going to see how these two changes have in fact helped us to come up with better outcomes than what we used to have previously. How it has improved the overall productivity of the user experience design teams, and how we are now able to deliver better products than we were with the earlier approach. So with this, I would like to introduce you to Amit Bakore, who is heading our user experience design practice. Amit, so can you give me a broad overview for the benefit of audience of the practice that you have built, and what is user experience design practice?
Sure. Thanks, Vinayak. So first and foremost, user experience actually at Synerzip is an offshoot of product management, which we started about 3 years back. And if you ask me in terms of the high points, probably when we started, the objective was very clear that the ultimate approach for the UX should not be like a monolithic block where, it's like a software architecture upfront, but rather do the next generation lean UX. So with that in mind, we started with literally just 1-person team, and today we are proud to say it's more than 24 people who have already successfully catered 24 plus products user experiences successfully. And above all, we have all the works which is done so far is a referenceable work. So I humbly take the pride, and the whole credit goes to the team. But that's where the whole thing stands, that the objective was to build that practice at Synerzip, which is a great remote user experience team.
Yeah, so can you give a brief overview of the user experience design practice?
Sure. So we probably realize one thing, that when we are really building this stuff, some things, they actually in our observation, they actually specifically work. And the first and foremost thing is the context. So unless and until you really understand the context clearly, you can't generate the value. So every week to the market counts, every dollar put in by the partner counts, and in such scenarios, it's vital that your business goal should be not just like being percolated at the product vision level, but it is well mapped with the user experience as well. And what ultimately matters is the business goal should be not only well understood, but in terms of the understanding of the end user psyche, the net value which we are generating for the end user, I think that is very, very important in the context. So ultimately we position the product in a way which fulfills its position in the context of the market. I think that's very vital. And this is applicable for, literally a brand new mobile app idea, which you are trying out literally within 6 to 8 weeks, or it's equally applicable for a large enterprise application which is undergoing a transformation. So that's the first thing which we have understood, and in our observation, which is working pretty well. But what is equally important is the efforts the team is putting in remotely, especially in the context of the research. I think that is very vital, that anything what they are trying to or attempting to build, that should be built in a true sense, which doesn't just generate the value for the user, but addresses the pain point. And when it comes to the really pain points, if you talk to any end user, you will always realize that even if you spend maybe 2 hours to interview your user, he or she will always have a long laundry list. And the beauty is that you have to be smart enough to filter out the wants versus the needs, or versus the KRs. And a lot of times that prioritization is very critical for the success of the user experience in the initial iterative cycles. So that's very critical. In addition to that, a lot of discovery which we have observed is when you're presenting any information, and if you really check with the end user, they will always ask, no, I want this and that and plus that as well. But the point is, somewhere you should be smart enough on 3 things. 1, right information hierarchy. 2nd, filtering out contents which are really, should be rendered on a need basis. And the last but not least, you should be very much aware that you are ultimately dealing with a cognitive load of the end user, which the end user doesn't understand. So when you are really doing the research and you are really pitching a solution or even a wireframe, I think it's very vital that you should be in synchronized with respect to this full context plus the research part.
So what you're telling is that if we give everything that the end user wants, the end user will be overwhelmed by it.
Precisely.
So we need to prioritize and decide what he wants is not what he needs. And
Precisely.
we have to give him just enough so that he doesn't get overwhelmed by what is the amount of information, the cognitive overload that you referred to.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And just to conclude the point, that a lot of times what happens is building a great user experience not necessarily means that you have to reinvent the wheel. So for example, if you're really talking about a simple e-com experience of a shopping cart, there is no need to really reinvent the wheel, because that adds to the learning curve of the end user. But at the end of the day, when you are really offering anything to the user in a given context, which is not a rudimentary context, it's not bad idea to give options. People love options, especially the executives. Mm-hmm. And in such cases, it's kind of an A/B testing where the choices are made, where they actually get a satisfaction that, oh, you know what, I was presented with options. And right. I think our observation is, it works. So
yeah.
that is
so
helpful.
You start with something that the user is used to, where you have a already formed habit. You can ride on that habit, but offer enough options so that the user doesn't get bored, that there is something new, some new learning and a new habit that he can form.
Correct. Very true. And obviously, this whole thing doesn't work unless and until you have right set of tools where people actually derive the choice of tools and they embrace the tools rather than you impose it on your team. So let them choose which is mainstream in the industry, and we are never shying away from that. So as part of our own experiences, we got rid of a lot of prototyping tools because we then later realized that if your main primary design tool itself can give you the basic wireframe which you can evolve further, that is a terrific saving. And you can quickly expose that through interactive prototypes to seek the feedback. In that case, a right set and the chain of tools, I think that's a fantastic option with respect to improving the throughput and efficiency.
So what you're saying is you're seamlessly going for a low fidelity prototype to a high fidelity prototype without having to switch tools.
And absolutely, and avoiding wastage. That is
Right.
most important.
Absolutely.
So what happens is industry evolves, tools also evolves, and we are always open for embracing and exploring new tools.
Mhm.
And to just name a few, we have standardized over last few years, getting rid of offshore or getting rid of similar, you can say, tools which were primarily for wireframing, and now we have standardized on Sketch, where we have observed that not only it is much better than Photoshop, at the end of the day, it's like pretty lean, and above all, it has got tons of extensions where we can like improve the overall functionality, the interfaces, but ultimately we can easily hook that up with InVision, create an interactive prototype, seek feedback, and so on and so forth. So today in 2018 we have standardized on this combination, but I'm very sure that by 2019 I think the set would have evolved.
Yeah, it would further, it will keep evolving. You have something for the wearables and watches and the audio interfaces, everything is coming.
Precisely. And to conclude the point, so the last thing what we have observed is process for UX is absolutely critical. There is no negotiation on that. But a lot of times what happens is, for the sake of process, we get overwhelmed sometimes. And unfortunately, that adds to a lot of baggage, that adds to a lot of wastage of precious cycles where go-to-market is critical every day. So what we realized is it's like, a buffet which is served to you. You only pick up what you really need in the given context or what you really like. So we will soon see on the next slide that for us to build a terrific remote user experience team helped and pivoted on the fact that you definitely have a very articulated process, but use it as a template. I think it's more on those lines that what we have realized is you can understand the importance of it, but at the end of the day, be flexible enough to really look at it as a mechano or as a piece of Lego piece rather than a rigid monolithic block. So that's all about the process.
Yeah, just like when the battles start, all plans go to hell. The same way, the process is a mandatory thing. You must have it, but you don't have to follow it when you are in the thick of the battle.
Precisely. Very well said.
Yeah.
So we will soon touch base on that. And obviously, we also never downplay the fact that when you are really claiming something on the user experience, you should be definitely able to measure it. So we have a slide for that, so we'll cover on that.
Yeah, so you're showing me the UX process as a template, and I see this looks very waterfallish. So it goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and it never comes back. So can you just explain? And I see some gears and I see some belts connecting those gears. So is this a process which is cyclical, like an agile iterative process, or it's a waterfall process? What's this?
Sure.
Because I came here expecting that we'd be talking about something that is not waterfallish.
Definitely. So Vinayak, the thing is, we on the left side, what you're saying is the first cut of our process, which we earlier referred as 6D, which was more of a rigid stack of stuff which we used to follow, and we realized that okay, it makes a lot of logical sense from the theoretical point of view, but when it really comes to the practical world, things doesn't work that way. And to make things work, you have to treat UX from a very different aspect, just like software architecture. So today we are talking about agile on the development side, but there are many architects who actually crib about the fact that agile is killing excellent software architecture practices. which help to scale the product, which helps to make the product secure, which is vital for the foundation of the product. Similarly, for excellent UX.
I'm going to take you on that, but
sure.
in a different forum.
Sure, we would love that. So the point is that for UX, we realize that UX and product management, they actually are having an excellent overlap, and in fact it's good because to make a terrific user experience, it is vital that the strategic aspect and the product positioning should be well understood and should be exploited by the UX team. So at Synerzip, we have been excellent. I mean, we are having an excellent combination where product managers are part of the user experience team per se. So if you really look at the evolved version of the process, which we again refer it as a template, has got two blocks. One is the foundation block and the other is the iterative block. So how we approach the problem is something like this. Whenever a partner approaches us for building any user experience, whether that's a small app or overall of an enterprise solution, we equally give importance for the areas like what is exactly the product positioning going to be when the whole thing is going to be out. We also give a very, very sincere angle to the fact that if there are multiple form factors involved, whether that's a full 40 feet screen or a browser or a tablet or a mobile or even a watch, the information hierarchy should be properly mapped in a sense that the actionability should be increased as the form factor reduces, and the importance of the information should be increased as the form factor reduces. But at the same time, you probably need to deeply understand that my user persona interacting with the same product on day 1 versus day 10 versus day 100, actually the persona evolves into a power user. And the catch is that when we are really designing the product, this is very important to understand that when we are doing the research, when we are applying a lot of different techniques, we have to be smart enough to understand that, okay, here is a repertory of tools, but what exactly I need at this point of time for the given context, let me pick that up and let's leave rest of the stuff. So that's how we ultimately evolved and came on the fact that with strategy, which is mainly product management flavor, the research where the user research comes in, and the analysis part gives us the I would say the foundation which is required for generating any engaging user experience. And unless and until in some cases you really give that due diligence and justice to deeply understanding the business rules or task flows, you are not making justice to the quickly iterative block. So foundation is must, and then what we do is we quickly, I'll address your point of gears and the belts, is once we really have that foundation ready, we dispatch it to the iterative block, which is which is in sync with the sprint of the agile. So for example, my development team is running a 2-week sprint. I'll ensure that the design for the nth sprint is ready in n-1th sprint so that the developers are not starved. And what we generally do is when we do the designing, as I just earlier mentioned, the same tool is evolved from the wireframing stage to the high fidelity, but what we do is we quickly shuttle it back to the validation phase, and any feedback which is there, we basically absorb the feedback. So that's how we basically ensure that the foundation and the iterative block, they are like taken care, and further it goes to the development and deployment as well.
Yeah, so this is an excellent summary. So there are some things which can't iterate,
Correct,
which are in the foundation block, which are one-time efforts which go in the foundation.
Correct.
And there are some things which evolve and iteratively improve. So those activities go into the iterative block. So that's a good way of looking at the UX process. Now, what are the tools? I mean, you mentioned a lot of tools. So can you just give a brief overview of the tools?
Sure. So I'll actually won't go in much depth here because we have already mentioned most of it. But what so far we have observed is we are keeping the core strategic and research part pretty simple. So the Google Analytics or any analytics data is a pivotal, I would say, starting point for gathering the basics for your research or understanding the existing user behavior. A lot of times, even if you can run quick surveys through tools like SurveyMonkey, they also come pretty handy. But in general, our observation is that you can keep things pretty simple, and instead of using really sophisticated tools, you can always use some straightforward, easily available softwares like Jira, which will definitely serve the purpose. But the secret sauce is between the design, validation, and development, where we have standardized on Sketch as the primary tool. In addition to that, we are closely interacting it with InVision, where the wireframe from the low fidelity is evolved in Sketch itself. But in InVision, we quickly export that so that the feedback is basically gathered. So I just quickly give you one quick example. So this is a small example where we have designed the stuff in in Sketch, and what we can really do is we can expose it through InVision, and there is a feedback which we can really offer to the end user and understand that, okay, how exactly the user can interact with the product. We can really gather the context that how the whole thing is working. We can also understand that whatever we intend to provide in terms of the functionality that is being made interactive with to the end user. So this is a quick way, an example where we can expose the product to the end user, and that basically serves the purpose. So this is one example of interaction. We can always take care of other areas as well. So for example, I'll probably touch base on some other examples where we have used some other tools to ensure that how Principal can be used very effectively for sharing animated prototypes, which especially are very useful when you are really selling a vision before you really build the actual user experience. Obviously, there are lots of plugins which are there, which we can always use. There are lots of other tools for testing as well, which we use. But I think the main thing is rapidly evolving design, seeking feedback.
So you are talking about principle as in proper noun principle, not a noun principle.
Yeah,
okay.
Principle for Mac. To be precise.
Okay. It's a name of a brand name of a software. Okay, good.
Right.
So Amit, can we quickly move ahead and how do you validate design? I mean, I seen design evolving, right? I mean, it doesn't. You start with something and it doesn't remain the same.
Correct.
So there is some validation required and some invalidation happens along.
Right.
So what is the process? How do you make those changes happen?
So two things. One is this reset example, which I just showed of a small mobile app where we really validate the set of wireframes or even high fidelity design with the end user, where in context they can put comments, we can rapidly evolve the design. That is one part of it. But a lot of times even guerrilla testing comes pretty handy. So I'll give you a different context here. So if you really look at the millennial generation, I think Vishal will be probably chiming in more on this, but in general they are having access to more or less same ecosystem and services all across the globe these days. So maybe a kid in New York having the same iPhone which I'm using today, he's ordering same Amazon service where I am having access to. The way he's consuming Airbnb, I'm doing that. Yeah. The way I grab a Starbucks in the next block,
or
he's
booking
doing
an air ticket or booking a hotel room, it's exactly all the same. Yeah,
it's more or less the same thing. Or using Uber.
Yeah.
So short thing is, I think that that social fabric which has evolved, that is helping us tremendously to mimic the personas. So for example, I might not have a direct access to the end user, but in many of these cases, I can basically grab and reach out to a guy who is really very much available locally, and he can get me up to 80% closer to the persona or real persona.
So you are using a proxy persona since we are doing it remotely.
Correct.
And so you're not really using the end user, but you're using somebody who serves as a proxy for him.
Correct.
Or her. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's where things stand. And
so that's how you're able to validate your design.
Correct. And last but not least, what happens is whenever we are really proposing something, a lot of times what happens is even if we run a quick heuristic for the existing solution, that gives a lot of baseline for pitching us the right revised design. So that's kind of, you can say, proactive validation. So that also helps.
So I believe that what you're saying that this works better than what it used to. But how do you measure it? I mean, finally the proof of the pudding is in eating. So how do you measure the outcomes or customer happiness and How do you tell that it's really working?
Right. So we'll be probably taking some baseline parameters to measure UX. So first and foremost, what happens is in many of these business workflows, there is a throughput which we can easily measure. So if there is a certain set of steps involved for conducting a particular action which leads to a certain business process closure, we can measure that, okay, with the older user experience, which is like before and after, how many number of such particular business processes the given user has been able to close in. So that gives us a baseline of a throughput, and we can definitely measure that. In some cases, error rate is also very critical. So especially in the healthcare industry, I think it is super critical that if you're, let's say, dealing with prescriptions, minimum the error rate, I think not only it's best, but ideally it should be 100%, which is like 0% error rate. So that's another measure of measuring, you can say, your solution. The other areas, which we can also count or convert, they include that, okay, I have an existing solution, but the conversion rate from freemium to premium is pretty low. I'm struggling on that because there is a problem with the discovery of the right plans for the end user, or user is not, I would say, getting an intuitive comparison, okay, which will compel or trigger that impulsive buy. In those cases, we can even measure the conversion rate. Also, there are certain derivative parameters as well. For example, sometimes you probably see a poster of a movie and you see another poster of the same movie, but you probably like one out of those two of the same movie. So it's like, the user sentiment or expression. You can always, in that case, run A/B testing and, get to know more on that. There are other areas as well. For example, you can even take a look at the total number of time taken for closing a certain action. And if you really look at the entire cycle time for a day or so, then you can even measure the server load and ensure that, okay, what extent it is really affecting your OPEX. Obviously, this is applicable for really large scale deployments, but that is still another parameter where you can really measure your UX. Obviously, there are other aspects as well. So for example, when we are really looking at the sitemap or the user journey, a lot of times we actually come across a fact that there's a problem with the discovery itself. So there is a lot of good content, but user is unable to really navigate to that point. So we can easily do the analytics report before and after, which will expose the fact that, okay, with the newer UX, the whole thing has been improved.
So what you're telling me is that you start with an objective. Right. I mean, unless you have an objective in mind, you would not be able to tell. So just the way a business model or a business has an objective, that is boiled down to a user experience objective where you are expecting a certain behavior or certain outcome.
Right.
And then you start with that and start measuring that, and then if you get the desired outcome, then so this all makes a lot of sense. So this brings us to right in the middle or halfway through the session, and now I'd like to start the panel discussion, and I would like to welcome Brandy, who's heading the design and the quality assurance team at PDX. So welcome Brandy Cheryl, who's VP of Design and Quality.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, and we also have Vishal Chauhan, who's the UX lead at Synerzip. So Brandy and Vishal worked as a team to build an product remotely. So Brandy is currently working from her office in Fort Worth, and that's almost half the globe away, 10.5 hours behind where Vishal is sitting in terms of time zone in Pune, India. And we're going to have a case study here where these two as a team have built an engaging user experience which is liked by their users. So my first question to you, Brandy, because I know that PDX was a product that has evolved, and it is a well-established product, but you didn't have formal user experience design. So my first question to you, why did you choose to invest in user experience as a process, and how is it helping you to get better experience for your end customers?
Sure. So the short answer is we chose to go this direction because we have to stay competitive. And I think UX design is a special skill set. As you said, we historically haven't had dedicated staff to do that. And if we wanted to move into the modern world, we needed to be part of that, because I think it can be the difference of launching a new product in its success or its failure. I know when I go to a site or use an app and it doesn't look fresh, and I think the product or the service can't be very good if they're not interested in upgrading that look and feel. Similarly, if it's too difficult to navigate, I'm going to move on and find one that works better. So I needed a staff that could understand what the users needed and wanted and make that happen. And so far, it's going great with our customers. We've taken some of our first pages to conferences and business meetings with potential clients even, and the response has been extremely positive. So we're really pleased with the experience so far.
Right, and I'm glad to hear that, because for the benefit of audience, the typical user in this case is quite seasoned professional in working in a pharmacy, and as one might expect with seasoned professionals, there is a bit of an inertia for any change, and the fact that this change is being well received is really goes to tell that there is a lot of benefit that is accruing here to the end user. So my next question is about doing it remotely. So you, Vishal here, and Brandy, you there, I mean, there's a myth, I call it a myth now because now I've seen you guys working remotely. So there's always people say, no, UX, you need to be in the same room, in the same time zone at the same time, so that you could have a conversation and you could evolve the user experience. So the end customer or the proxy customer or the end user has to be with the UX designer physically in the same room, face to face. Well, that's the myth, and now you have this team working remotely. So how's that? How was your experience overall, Brandy?
So we haven't run into issues so far. We have worked with offshore teams for quite some time and have been successful. But we have regular conference calls between our local designers, our stakeholders, to provide that feedback. We do screen sharing of the screens that we're using. We have web conferences where we can use video cameras if necessary. And in our case, at least, as you mentioned, we're a pharmacy software product, and in Pune, you don't have the same concept of pharmacy. So it's a product your team wouldn't even typically use, and we've still managed to make it successful because of the frequent communication, the visibility on the WebEx type initiatives between the two teams where we can share our screens. You can also share desktops. Sometimes our users can interact if you give them control over the system, but typically that's not even necessary. So we haven't had any issues.
You had alluded to principle.
Yes.
So how's that helping? I mean, it's a tool, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So let me take a very concrete case here. So as we started really working in a very initial stage with Brandy, it was an executive decision to engage UX, and they were having a really short time to validate the fact that can we do UX. And in that case, it was not an option to do something and show. So what we did is we actually understood the vision from them, and then we presented a solution for that. So let me quickly take you to that so that yeah, so here is on your screen, you can see a product vision, which we just listened out from the product manager and understood the pain points, and on basis of which we basically prepared a solution in principle, and that just painted out a vision of the product before we really build the product. And you can just see on the screen that how the whole thing is so immersive and engaging that for an executive to make a decision and basically sign up for a team is an excellent way to sell UX.
Yeah, I have experienced that if you present a wireframe, a bland wireframe to an executive committee, they just don't appreciate it, right? I mean, they don't get the full picture,
Exactly.
right? So here's a way where you can almost show the end product even before you started.
Exactly. And I would rather let now Brandy to comment on this, a small video. So Brandy, what was your initial, reaction to this whole thing when we presented for the very first time?
We were incredibly impressed. We were able to show it over and over to multiple users who were interested. Often they had us pause and go back and look at something, and we were incredibly impressed with what you guys did with the screen. I mean, that's really what wowed people, was the action, not even the tool of the video. It was, what you guys did with the application and making it so user-friendly. You saved so much space. I mean, what we had on 8 screens, you put onto one with the same, level of data, the way you consolidated issues. But yeah, having this video was very helpful in pitching this to our executive team for approval, showing our internal staff, hey, we want you to work with this team. Here's an example of what they can do and what we can see, and it went over really well.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much. So with that, I'll just pass on the baton to Vishal. So Vishal, you actually took this as an input, and based on this, you ultimately delivered the actual product. So what was your experience to channel the whole journey?
Yeah, so thanks, Amit. I would like to answer this in a different way. So understanding a user's pain point in this case was the main thing, and then validating user's goal, because initially we got the idea from a PM perspective. So we had a lot of discussion with a pharmacy technician, because this application was designed for a pharmacy technician, and fortunately we had a pseudo persona as a pharmacy technician herself as a developer at PDX team. So we took their help and then understood their pain point, and then created a first set of wireframes and then tested it out. And we had a lot of design discussions over that, and then focus group discussions, and then that's how we validated the user goal, and then we validated and then went ahead with the high fidelity prototype and then collaboration in InVision to actually have it collaborative.
Yeah, but then you had someone. But what if you don't? You had someone, you're lucky, but you don't. You're not always that lucky, right? I mean, what if you don't have anybody like that who's a pseudo or a proxy persona who's already worked in the same pharmacy kind of environment? I mean, what if you just don't have?
Yeah, so to understand the insights, we use other tools also, like running a survey to a early stage enthusiast user bases, and then get some insights. Additionally, if the product is enterprise grade, we use some other tools such as user testing and Quarrel to have them recruited on our platform, and then have the testing, user testing on the wireframes to validate in such cases, Vinayak.
Yeah, and also the very fact that the way Amit mentioned, that the way people behave across the globe, the millennial generation in particular,
right?
It's the same. I mean, everyone is familiar with the user experience that you get, whether it's Airbnb or Pokemon Go.
Right.
Whether you're in China or whether you're in the United States, it's the same.
Yes, it
so
is.
That might have helped you in a way to kind of, the world is flat, so it's no longer that, because you're sitting here several thousand miles away, it doesn't really deprive you of knowing what good experience is. Yeah.
Indeed.
So we would like to now quickly go to the user experience brochure. And, for the benefit of the audience, I would like to mention that this brochure that we have created is going to be available for everyone to download. And, you get most of the facts that we are covering today in this brochure. So you're welcome to go to our website, leave your email address and download this brochure. So with that, let me ask the same question to Brandy, since we need an expert or a user, and how do you design when you don't have direct access? I believe that there are several times when you want an end user to talk to, but you don't have direct access to the end user. So how do you overcome this challenge, Brandy?
So for us, it's just a matter of communicating as frequently as you can with as many people as you can. I think having different experiences and backgrounds, even if it's not the ultimate end user, that input is still valuable because you may have users in some form or fashion, even if it's not with what you are working on in particular, they still worked on some kind of application. So I think just communicating with as many people as you can and getting any outsider's opinion is going to be helpful in the process.
And you also mentioned expert group, Brandy. So can you tell a little bit more about expert groups?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite following.
So maybe Vishal can chime in here.
Yeah, so you have expert groups, Vishal, where it's not like an on-site domain expert, but you have somebody who is representing him as a proxy. So there are groups of people that you deal with, and that kind of also takes care of the IP challenges that you might have, that you might not have to access information which which otherwise is not allowed to be accessed. So Amit, what is your take? I mean, you talked about principle. So tools like how do you work with a case where you just don't have access to the end user?
So in those cases, we go with some core aspects. One is we go back to product management, and we really try to understand that what is the exact priority for the tasks what the end user is supposed to accomplish. So with those KRAs, we try to map the fact that is there a heuristic challenge today, or is there an information architecture challenge today which the end user is facing, which is really leading to the problems. So to address the pain point, a lot of times you have to go back to the basics. So for example, if you're really analyzing a task flow and you realize that the task flow itself is so complicated, then you have to actually make the user more comfortable to first provide a high level context, and then take the user through different steps. So not expecting you provide a single super complicated screen with bunch of options and make the user to deal with all those options on the same screen. Rather, you basically convert that into a workflow and ensure that you accomplish and handhold the user to get to the same point. So product management is a terrific help for building amazing and engaging and simplified user experiences.
Also, there is one more thing I would like to add here, which when you don't have an access to direct user, we have a secondary method of getting a user's data using a qualitative research method. One of it is to getting applications, analytics available, such as Google Analytics, and then you see the user pattern, bounce rates, and other stuff. So that you will know from your information architecture where exactly user is getting off from the website or of your application, and then based on that you create a task flow of an existing user base and then validate it like, okay, this page is not discoverable, so how we can make that accessible for a user from the existing journey.
Yeah, so if I ask you that you will know much more about the user than the user himself, or much more about the user than you would know instead of physically sitting next to him and asking. Instead of that, if you observe his behavior with small details on these analytics, you would probably know much more, right?
Right, because it is more of a quantitative research where you have more than one users available to get the insights for your product.
Wonderful. So, Amit, what is the difference? I mean, how are you different? So, if we have to tell in a gist of maybe a paragraph or a couple of sentences, how is this experience going to be different for an end customer who's wanting to build an engaging user experience and a good product?
Sure. So I think we have got a bunch of questions. I'll definitely come to those questions, but quickly let me answer your point. So in short, in terms of building an engaging, excellent user experience with a remote team, we have focused, I mean, if you ask me the secret sauce, we have focused on process efficiency. So basically treating process itself as a template and ensuring that there is minimum wastage. So that's the first aspect of it. The second aspect of it is we always focus on the fact that look at user experience from the eyes of product manager. So it's like if you really look at the orthodox way or waterfallish way to look at user experience, we have married the orthodox way in the, you can say, the foundation block with the iterative block of the agile world of development. So that way, whatever my brain is capturing, all my limbs, hands, eyes, ears, they are well connected, so that the data which the product management is really gathering from the product level is well percolated down at the user experience level, which is ultimately gets iteratively built. So that's where things are.
Yeah, so your brain is talking to your body.
Exactly, that you can say.
Yeah, so that is the difference. Yeah, I mean, instead of having your brain sitting somewhere else and your body sitting somewhere else, you're having in the same team.
Right.
That makes a big difference. So, Brandy, your inputs, I mean, how are we different? I mean, you have must have had past experience. So, how are we different? How's your experience with Synerzip different?
I think it's the quality of your team. I think you guys do a great job of vetting your staff members, and you only hire those who are exceptional in their experience and their eagerness to contribute. You're hiring folks who are really interested in this piece of the industry, and they want to try new things and they want to explore, and I think that makes a difference. You guys also have a quality of service that I don't experience from all of our different vendors. You do follow up to make sure things are going well for us across the board, not just the people we might talk to on a regular basis about our projects, but across all your levels of leadership. You're following up and making sure that nothing is missing, and if there's anything more you can do. Your team is very responsive. They're very receptive to the feedback, and that's hard when somebody takes their life or their week's worth of work and presents it, and you get constructive feedback. Sometimes everyone isn't always as receptive, but your team takes it, excited and say, okay, great, we can make this better because of this information. And I think that's the difference in your team and others that I've worked with in the past.
Thanks, Brandy. So, to finally sum up, can you just give some highlights, and I think Amit and Brandy, you can take turns as to, what is the final outcome of the PDX user experience work that we did. So, can you just touch the high points there?
Yeah, of where we're at in our project. I mean, one thing that kind of ties into the question you had previously asked too about the quality of your team and what's different. You guys helped us in choosing the right type of technologies as well. I mean, we started in one place, and your team was pretty instrumental in choosing where we needed to go and making suggestions to make the end product better from the background perspective. And I think that kind of drove us to where we are today. If we hadn't had those discussions, if your team hadn't stepped up and said, hey, you should take a look at this, product and technology instead, we would have ended up in a completely different place. And so where we're at right now is we've completed a couple of contracts with you all, and we're renewing because we want to keep seeing what your team is going to provide for our product line. I think it's going to make it successful. Our customers are jumping on board. Like you said, in this industry, it's really hard to get people accustomed to change when they are used to making the same keystrokes day after day, and we're giving them something different. But the team is making it simple to use. You don't need an instruction manual. It's intuitive, and I think that's going to make our product successful.
Right. So what we heard is that make it easy, reduce the cognitive load, and even people who have inertia would start using because it is simpler, easier to use, and yes, it's ready for the future. So with this, I think we have some time now for Q&A.
Yes.
And we have some questions coming in. So the first question is, what is a KRA?
Yeah, what is a KRA? So KRA is a key result area. So what we have been doing is we have been referring to the objectives for a given end user, a business objective or business goal, you can say. More formal, you can say, terminology, which is a industry standard terminology, which is key result area, that what he or she is supposed to accomplish as part of his or her primary role. So that's KRA.
Right. And the second question is,
as a UX person, how to tackle offshore user research conflict where users are from different regions. So I'll let Vishal chime in here to address this. So when we are really gathering the research data for any other region, we have to be a little bit cautious on a couple of aspects. One is a cultural aspect. So for example, if I'm doing a research on maybe some of the European countries, and probably if I compare the same with maybe something which I'm doing for China, I have to be sensitive all across, not only for the languages like support for IFIGs or localization or internationalization, but in general, the cultural trends. Maybe that really starts with choice of colors or superstitions. I mean, as simple as that, there is no row number 13 into any of these airplanes from Boeing or Airbus. The very simplistic reason is that they are sensitive to the actual sentiments of the user. So that is a user experience. So short thing or short answer to that is it boils down to the cultural differences. It boils down to the legal requirements. It boils down to the expectations of the existing practices. It boils down to the fact that the preferences. So for example, if I'm really doing something for a Finnish guy, probably that's not necessarily, I'll be doing similar stuff for a guy who is maybe from Sahara. So at the end of the day, it's all about climate. It's about the infrastructure. It's about the, you can say, the socio-economic levels of that particular country, and so on and so forth, in addition to the core business functionality with which I'm going to deal with.
Yeah, so it's like, an actor playing a role in a movie which is not coming from his own culture, but he has to act as someone else coming from a different culture. So he has to study, he has to research, and he has to understand that culture and put himself in the shoes of the character that he is acting. So the same way you have to research and come to know, get to know the cultural differences and the climatic, social aspects, the economic aspects. So there's a whole lot that goes with this. So, as Alan Cooper once told me in, how a persona is built. So he says a persona is never built, a persona is discovered.
Okay.
Right? So you never build a persona.
Right.
As you go along, you'll go on discovering your persona. That, okay, here's what the real, but enough research, enough discovery that happens that you will discover the end persona that you're building this product for. So with that, I have a question. So are there any more?
Yeah, there are more. By the way, so just to concluding comment on the previous question, Prafulla. So the best way, or I would recommend, is engage a localite to ensure to validate the user research across the regions to ensure that you are not really missing anything critical. So the next one is how to introduce consumer grade experience to enterprise solutions. Right now, B2B solutions lack UX. So the classic example is Salesforce
or SAP.
SAP for that matter. Yeah. So in fact, Vishal is exactly doing the same thing for PDX. So he's consumerizing the enterprise experience, right, Vishal?
Yes, I am doing that.
Yeah.
So so how's that? I mean, there is inertia. SAP has been used by the same users day in and day out for several years. I mean, probably he is what he is because of his special knowledge of those special screens that only he can decipher.
Yes,
So
but
how are you going to consumerize his job?
because the same very user, it's also using the applications like Uber, Slack, right, Jira. So they have transformed very much, and the expectation of a user over a time has been graduated to have, they are habitual to get now new user experience, and they, as soon as they come to the enterprise grade application, and then they expect similar kind of experience on the same enterprise grade application. So this led us to consumerize the enterprise application.
So what you're saying is that the old inertia has now become new inertia.
Yeah.
So the new inertia is Airbnb and Uber and Instagram. So
right.
These experiences are making people so aware of the latest and the greatest way of navigation and of getting into news that it has become kind of the new inertia, and they don't want to change from there, so they are expecting the same thing in your enterprise application.
Right. Not showing all the option at once, but showing the options when user needs it, when user expected to see it.
Right, and all those wonderful things that we see there. It's really, really good that today's enterprises are, and also BYOD might be helping, because today a lot of the enterprise applications have to provide the mobile interface, and the mobile interface will come with all the latest and the greatest in design, right? I mean,
yes.
You would not build a mobile interface the same way as you built your desktop.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So any more questions?
Yeah,
please?
so we have another one. So please list the names of the UX tools. So in fact, I have put up the slide from where Tony can get those names. But in addition to that, this UX brochure would be made available tomorrow. So you can download that. So you will get all the details from that. We have another one from Tony, which is rapid design tool names. Yeah, so that should cover in the same set of slides. We have another one. So as a UX person, how to convince stakeholders to invest time in UX, which is budget. So short answer to that is the exact sample which we just showed some time back for PDX, where Brandy in the very initial stage with her executive team was unwilling to invest into UX. But when they saw the vision of the product, which is like 2.0, they were excited enough to really sign up for that. So short answer is you first build the vision, and I think a tool like Principle comes pretty handy for that, and you can definitely build that, show it, and that should be giving you your required sign up. Another one is how you measure ROI in UX. We have covered that, I think, in later slides. Yeah, what are KRAs we covered. Okay, internet sites often don't get enough love when it comes to UX. How can we make internet sites more interesting and not just something that employees use just because they have no option? Short answer to that is you can actually hire junior UX professionals and give them as a challenge that make them compelling and exciting enough so that you can track and prove the fact that the analytics data shows, okay, here is a before version and here is the after version of the user engagement. You can definitely do that. We have another one in terms of the UX process. How can applying the Pareto principle be useful? Yeah, excellent question. So this 80-20 game, that's Pareto rule, right? When correct. So the 80-20 game, it works in a way that you have to actually in UX at least invest 20% of your time for the foundation block so that you don't make a grave mistake in your iterative block, which is 80% of the value. So I would address it that way. Next one is, what did you use for prototyping Brandy's video? So answer is, we sketch those wireframes into, my apologies, we sketched the design into Sketch first, and we imported those screens into Principle to give it animation effect. Another one we have, UI UX development is iterative, just as is the requirements process and the development implementation process. How do you manage the expectations for UI UX cross-functional collaboration? Is this done through social means or do we have tools to manage this? Short answer is that it's not social means. So as your design becomes complicated, we actually have to manage the design language.
No,
Because-
I think the question is about a cross-functional team.
Correct, but when it starts with the design team itself. So for example, if I'm talking about developers, product manager, QA, usability testers, and actual designers, let's say there are multiple designers working on the product. I think they need to know and they need to sign up for a standard design language for a given product personality. And the version control tool for the designing which we are using
is abstract, so it helps us collaborate and working on the same design file with the multiple designers, and then having the same file, just like how developers do a version controlling, we do the same for the design, so that we maintain the consistency in a design language for our design product design language as well.
Yeah, so I have an answer there to Jim. So Jim, what brings the cohesion in the team is many times you have a design coming from the UX design team and you have no reason or you have no information as to why they have designed it the way they have designed it. You just know that there is a persona like XYZ, but you don't know why that persona is behaving the way he is supposed to behave. So the flow of information, so every research that is conducted, every result that comes from the research that happens in the initial process has to be communicated to the entire team, including DevOps, including the QA, including the developers, including the you can't say that, look, what these guys have to do with the user experience. Of course, everyone in the team is building user experience. It's not just the UX designer.
Very true.
So
Well said.
this information is where you said that the brain is talking to the hands, right? So the information from the brain has to reach the hands and the feet, everything. So that's how the cross-functional collaboration, to your question, Jim, is going to happen. It is more to do with communication, which tools you use is unimportant. The thought behind the fact that this needs to be communicated is more important, whether you send it by email or you do it using
Jira
or whatever.
Yeah,
That is less important. The fact that you have to open the doors and let the information flood,
right.
that let it go to everyone. That is more important.
Perfect. Next one is why we have we have stopped using Excellarate is because there is simply benefit to get the stuff done in Sketch from low fidelity and evolve it into high fidelity. Then next one we have in the demo you did for PDX, how did you know what the end user wanted? Oh, that's an excellent question. So we actually talked to the product manager, and from the product manager we got to know the KRS for the product, and from there we derived it.
And also we had the product's old version in front of us.
Correct. Yeah,
right?
that's
and we had
one.
built that old version over the previous 10 years. So we had that unfair advantage.
Right. Yeah, so Tony, Ron. So yes, there are no names on the slide for the tools. So the tools are Sketch, Principal, InVision. These are the three main tools which we are using. Feel free to shoot out an email to me. I'll be happy to provide you much more details if you need. Last few, okay, how you define customer experience in UX process. Yeah, so CX is a very different thing. I probably feel this today's webinar is probably just focused on UX, so I probably will skip this, but please connect with me directly. I'll be happy to answer it separately. That's all from I think everyone. So a lot of good engagement from the question side, and we are right on the clock. So over to you, back to back. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll advance the slides and we talk about the next webinars that are coming up. So we are, as you know about Synerzip, Synerzip conducts these monthly webinars, and we have our presence in multiple places, including Silicon Valley, Dallas, and in India. And we have 500 plus strong team working from here in India with 110 plus product success stories. It's a dual shore model with 10 plus years in business. Someone would work with Synerzip and derive 50% savings from optimized delivery and accelerated product roadmap at XX the speed. We have been in the Inc. 5000 awards for the 6 consecutive years. And we are a truly agile product development partner, as you must have heard several times before this. So we have different offerings. So we have proof of concept. So you could be having a bright idea, you could come to us, we could build an MVP for you, or we could simply provide you the required skills in the offshore model. And of course, our bread and butter is to take your product roadmap and accelerate it at any stage of the product's life cycle. Or you might want to upgrade or migrate to a new technology, like for example, from a monolith to microservices, and that's something that we do. Or we provide specialized services like QA testing and automation. And this is our offshore model that we have covered here. So how you leverage the dual shore operations. So we have presence both on the state side as well as in India. And this is a bunch of courses. It's not a representative, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's just a representative of a few customers here. And finally, the announcement for the next webinar. So next webinar, we have Amy Jo Kim, who would be talking about game thinking. She has published a playbook, and I have read that book. It's an excellent book, and she would be talking about that in the next webinar. And we always get taken in by hype of microservices, and we don't look at the cost. So here's a webinar by Colin Jones on July 25th on the underestimated costs of microservice architecture. So with this, I will end today's webinar. Thank you very much. Thanks for attending. We had a wonderful time, and the participation was excellent.
Thanks
Thank you all.
everyone. Thank you all.